So our next session, we're going to learn about the Family Intervention Restorative Services of Texas, otherwise known as FIRST Diversion Program. This community-based program serves youth who have been charged with misdemeanor offenses that involve some disruption in the family unit. The FIRST approach focuses on both the juvenile and the family to help address the root causes by equipping the whole family with coping and communication skills necessary to avoid criminal justice involvement. Our panelists are Wayne Young, Arianna Mellinger, Henry Gonzales, and John Jordan. Welcome, everyone. Wayne Young is the Chief Executive Officer of the Harris County Center for Mental Health and IDD, the state-designated local mental health authority and local intellectual and developmental disability authority for Harris County, Texas. As the CEO, one of the largest behavioral health organizations, as the CEO of one of the largest behavioral health organizations in the nation, Mr. Young is passionate about the planning and delivery of large-scale behavioral health and intellectual and developmental disability services to a population who rely upon safety net systems of care. We have Arianna Mellinger, who was the first youth peer support specialist at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD, and one of the two peers with the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team. She joined the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD in 2020 and was the first youth peer support specialist at the Harris Center and one of the 4 in the state of Texas. By sharing her lived experience in the area of mental health, substance abuse, and criminal justice, she strives to make an impact in their lives by inspiring hope and teaching skills to help them to navigate the road to wellness. Next, we have Henry Gonzales, who is the Executive Director of the Harris County Juvenile Probation Department. He has been with Harris County for more than 30 years. He started his career there with pretrial services and eventually moved to serve as a field officer, a gang liaison, and resource training officer. In 2010, he became the Assistant Executive Director of HCJP and was appointed Executive Director in 2018. Last but certainly not least, we have John Jordan, who is the Juvenile Division Chief of the Harris County District Attorney's Office. He has been an Assistant DA for 20 years in Harris County, Texas. In November of 2017, Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg asked him to lead the Juvenile Division and tasked him with expanding diversionary programs and improving the police intake process of juvenile cases. Under his tenure, the number of petitions filed in juvenile court has been reduced by over 50%. And the number of diversion programs have increased from 1 to 6 innovative programs. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panelist. I believe, do we have a moderator or is anyone?
I think I'm just
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Jordan.
How y'all doing? That's pretty good. Let me try it again. How y'all doing? Okay. As far as objectives, because I was just thrown to me to do the objectives, so I'll just kind of summarize. I think the objective is to get everybody in the state to do this program and to show that what happens and magic happens when people collaborate together, recognize a problem, have a solution, and then have leaders such as Henry and Wayne who are willing to say, okay, we're all on board. And at that time when we started this program, Denise Onken, she's in the room. Denise, raise your hand. And so she was a big part of this. So first of all, when Kim Ogg came into office, I was over all the felony trial courts. And she sent me to the juvenile division and she said, I want you to reduce the overall footprint and expand diversions. I had no idea what that meant. And so we have reduced the footprint by about 50% and we've expanded diversions from 1 to 6. But the very first diversion program we created was this program, which was the Family Intervention Restorative Services of Texas. If you're wondering, we stole the name from King County, which is in Seattle, Washington. They call theirs FERS, and we just added a T on the end for Texas, and it became the first program. But I don't think they do it like we do it. And so this was what the problem was. We would have law enforcement go to a home, and either it be the guardian, the parent, or the grandparent would be calling law enforcement because their child either threatened them, tore up the house, or assaulted them. And ended it up being there were 2 different factors that would cause this call. One, the guardian was going through the kid's cell phone, and then the kid, y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Or frankly, inappropriate discipline on the parent's fault, and then it would escalate. And guess who went to jail? The kid. So then the kid would go to detention. They would stay in detention for an average of 35 days because the parent was done with them. Then the parent decided, well, I'm really not done with them. And then we'd get the kid and then want the case dismissed. Does this sound familiar? And we'd be right back there within the next couple months. And then you also think about just the logic of the juvenile justice system. You know, when our youth go to court, who is sitting right next to them? Their parent. And the parent's my victim. And then if we think this through and go to trial, how are we even going to do this? So there is this space that's a real problem that needs addressing, and that really the court system is not the place for it to be. As you know, Judge, I mean, like, it would take us 6 months to get the case resolved, even if they would stick with it. So now we're getting probation 6 months later. We've paid a lot of money in attorney's fees, and the problem's not getting solved. So we just knew that there was a problem. So we went to Henry and his folks, and then they say, well, why don't we go to Wayne and his folks? And we all got in a room, and both of these guys said, yes, let's do it. And that was how we created the first program. And it is designed to help the families. In Harris County, we have a unique position where when an officer is on the scene, they call a DA. And the DA has to authorize what we call charges, but it's really just authorizing the arrest, okay? And so that's kind of how the whole process begins. And either they are returned home if it's a normal case, and I'll talk about what we do here. And then after that arrest, we then analyze it the next day. And then we can either reject the charge, we can put them in a diversion program, or 3, we can file a petition in court, okay? And that's kind of how our process works. In the past, when it came to these family violence cases, frankly, before COVID, they would go to jail for the night, right, Henry? They would go to jail for the night for basically 24 to 48 hours. Then Wayne's folks through MCOT and their crisis intervention team would go to the jail, talk to the family members, have a conversation within 24 hours with the family members to convince them to get them out of jail. And then they would be referred to this program, which is basically a 6-month probationary period without a petition being filed. And as long as they get the services and mental health services that they are supposed to get, we never file the petition. And that's generally how it was working. And then we were reducing the jail time from 35 days to 1 or 2 days. Then COVID happened, and we were trying to clear our detention center out. So then it became, okay, let's try and get other family members to take the kid that night as we continue through this process. And so that's in a nutshell from the DA's perspective, how we set it up. We recognized a problem. We wanted to address it. Instead of having 500 or 600 cases a year in family violence that ended up probably getting dismissed or deferred in court, we wanted to address it in a different way. But we don't know what the problem is. That's why Juvenile Probation and Harris Center is there, because they can correct the problem to try and hopefully cure it so we don't see them again. And I will be back to talk about the success of it towards the end, I believe. Now it's Henry.
Are we good if I just stay? There we go. Stay here and sit instead of up there, because trust me, I will fall. Good, great, thanks. Okay, I became the chief in 2000, latter part of 2018, and I know one of the things that I wanted to do was to deal with our detention population. So in Harris County, we have a 210-bed juvenile detention center, and when you utilize those boat beds on the floors and the day rooms, we have a max capacity of 250. 2017, we were averaging 276 kids in our detention center on a daily basis. That was way too many. So I know that what I wanted to do was to tackle that number. By 2019, we were inching our way down to about 200, and by early 2020, we had reached about 175 kids, and we were on a steady stream of decreasing our population in detention. Then COVID hit. And being that the detention center is a congregate living center, we know that viruses spread rapidly in a setting like that. So we had to do what we could to decrease that number. So we met with John's folks to staff every case in detention to see how many kids we could released from detention and still, consider this the safety of the community. So we were able to get our numbers down to under 100 and maintain that for the majority of the peak of COVID. We knew that once COVID was done, that our numbers would go back up again, and they they eventually did. So to keep the numbers down during COVID, what we did is we set our own criteria of who is eligible for detention, and I will say eligible with air quotes, because any kid charged with a Class B misdemeanor and above can actually go to detention. But when we looked at the kids that were in our detention center and we eliminated those kids who had those egregious offenses, what we were finding is there were a lot of kids in there because of uh, the types of situations that John was talking about at home. And that's not the place or detention's not the place to address those issues within the family. Um, we are fortunate to have a great health services division with mental health professionals in our department. And so they started to identify those kids whose behavior was really more of a symptom of unmet mental health needs. So we identified those kids, and with the help of the Harris Center, we were able to get services for those kids. Now, you can imagine local law enforcement, after they've called John's folks and they're able to follow those or take those charges and arrest the kid, then they call us to let us know that they're bringing the kid in, or if it's a kid that they feel can be released, see if we want them. And so now all of a sudden we're saying, nope, can't bring that kid in. Fortunately, law enforcement eventually understood what we were trying to do, so they were good with that. And really all it took was a couple of times of calling the police to say, hey, that kid you brought in last night, he tested positive. And so that helped kind of encourage them to decrease the number of transports to detention. So again, we were able to keep those numbers down. Post-COVID, as much as we can say it is, we're up to about 120 kids in detention and trying to maintain that number. It's still high, but it's a lot lower than it was. And it's a number that's manageable to an extent. So how did we do this? Let's go back to that steady increase that we were trying to accomplish pre-COVID. Again, we're identifying those kids to where the behaviors are more indicative of a need for unmet services. Again, we're fortunate to have the Harris Center, and that not only were they willing to work with us to meet the needs of these families, they were actually willing to go into our detention center with their transition coordinators, I think that's what they're called, to identify those kids and then link the families to services so we can get that kid out of detention, back into the community, but now with an appointment with the Harris Center. As we all know, again, detention's not the place to treat mental health needs. Same thing with the courts. The courtroom is not the place to treat those symptoms. So the good thing with this is that as we were connecting the kids to the services in the community, then we were able to get with John's folks and not file a petition on that kid, because now we can say that those needs are being met. Let's see. Now that we're doing things differently, I can say, as far as the law enforcement buy-in, now that law enforcement really has a good feel of who comes into detention and who doesn't, what we've seen is those numbers of calls from the police to say, hey, we've got a kid that we want to take there, have decreased. I'm going to say that the police are using more discretion now, and they're getting a better understanding of really what kind of kid needs to be in detention and who doesn't. Today, of those 120 kids, no less than 100 of them are in there for a charge that has an A in front of it: aggravated robbery, aggravated assault. Then we've got at least 20 kids, I think, right now, and they're charged with murder or capital murder. So our population has significantly changed of who's in detention, and that's what we wanted to do, to get those kids out of detention who did not pose a threat to the community or who were at low risk for rearrest. Um, what we were truly doing is we were diverting kids from the system. And we know that diversion is not anything new, that it's a very common practice in juvenile justice. In 1984, about 50% of the kids nationwide who were entering the system were being diverted out. By 1998, when there was the concern for juvenile crime and violence, that decreased to about 43%. What this meant is that a lot of kids with first offenses and lower level offenses were going to court, and they were being formally processed for minor law breaking. That diversion rate has hardly changed since 1998. In 2014, the most recent data that I could find had about just 44% of the kids across the country being diverted. The Harris County number was not much lower than that. We were at about 50% in 2017. We know that we didn't want to stop there, that we wanted to increase those diversions. And when I say we, I mean everyone that's at this table collectively. John wanted to see a shift from 80% of the kids going in front of a judge for a misdemeanor offense and 20% for felony. As of today, we have been able to switch that 80-20 to where at least 80% of the kids going in front of a judge is for a felony offense, less than 20% are for misdemeanors. Our true diversion rates now of kids being diverted out of the formal processing is at about 70%. So we have only about 30% of our overall referrals coming in who are now going in front of a judge. Again, John wanted to keep these kids out of detention and not going into court. Wayne wanted to make sure that these kids' needs were being met in the community and not in the detention center. And we're doing that. I think the first program really eliminates the heavy reliance for formal processing and probation supervision for those low-risk kids. And now that, again, that the police are seeing how we're doing things differently, I again want to say, though, I think we have their buy-in on that. Let's see. I think that's it for me at this point, Wayne.
All right. I'm going to stand up only because I didn't come prepared with sheets. And so I need this monitor. I couldn't see around the corner, so I'm just not as prepared as Henry. It isn't that I present better standing up, really. So I'll talk about a couple of things. First, I'll start with the folks that are at this table are some of the best people you could hope to work with. I suspect other mental health folks in the room, if the number 2 or 3 person at the DA's office and the head of juvenile probation calls you to a meeting and says, we'd like to put less kids with mental health concerns in detention. Like you say yes and figure it out, right? Like, just a tip for you. I had no idea how it was going to work. I had no idea how we were going to do it. We had no more money. We didn't have any, we got nothing special in this deal, right? As it turns out, we built a couple of things around it and we've got some other plans I'll mention too. But in the moment, sitting in the room, I really had no idea how it was going to work. What I did know is that they were motivated and willing to accomplish the task that I wanted, which was the people that we served to reduce the footprint of the criminal justice system in their lives. And so that opportunity presented itself, and I said yes. Now, I got really lucky because I have talented people like Arianna and others on our team who could make that a reality, right? Who can take my yes and turn it into something that's meaningful and impactful and really makes a difference. And so with no new dollars, we suddenly have this different charge. I'll be honest, though, to think about it. So Henry has his own mental health folks that are in detention, but we provide now the psychiatric services for those youth. We're the ones that are going to catch them when they come out. These are our kids anyway, right? It's not like suddenly we're going to be serving kids that aren't ours. They're a part of our system. They're a part of who we serve anyway. And so, but it is often challenging, as you can imagine, to go to your team and say, hey, we're going to do this new thing. And we know you're busy, and we know you probably have more to do than you could possibly do already, and you're going to have to figure out how to absorb that, right? And so those words got said to Sarah. Sarah is in the audience, and I'm glad that she's here so that we can acknowledge her work and the impact that she's made. And so we went to work figuring out what resources do we have? Well, we've got mobile crisis response teams. These kids are in crisis. Right, I would have loved to have gotten called before they called law enforcement in this family conflict as this crisis began to escalate. It's certainly framed as family conflict, but it's a crisis, right? And often it is a crisis of mental health, the youth, the parent, both. often have challenges around mental health. We do have a process if they're not appropriate for us or they're not a mental health component. There's other things that we can do and support them. Very few of them are appropriate for mental health services and supports. So our MCOT team is the one who we engage, and as was described pre-COVID, they would, and I think it was clear, the challenge was often that the parents would get called the next day and say, please come get your child. And they would say, no, thank you. I'm not interested in that. You keep him. You do something. I've been trying, right? And probably they had. And so part of it was, how do we get them out of detention within 48 hours so that the series of things that have to happen to keep them beyond that point don't have to occur? And so the MCOT team was the first logical thought. And they would go meet the parents at the detention center and try and begin to piece things together. And a lot of times for them, it was helping that family be comfortable that we would be there to support them, so that they would feel comfortable taking that youth home, that they weren't alone in this process, right? That they would have a little bit of support going around that. We did get a system of care grant and leveraged that grant for a youth peer support specialist. You'll hear more about that in a couple of minutes. And I will tell you, from our perspective, she's a part of the secret sauce on this deal, right? Like, if you really want to know how does this thing work, she has a lot to do with that, and some of her colleagues and others that do the work and support folks. From a technical standpoint, these are youth 10 to 16 years old. It is voluntary from our perspective, from a mental health perspective, not necessarily from their perspective. There would likely be some consequences and action taken if they didn't engage with us. I think that the idea of not pursuing those charges would fall away, and in fact probably has a time or two. But for us, from a mental health perspective, there's not an order that says they have to be there. They're choosing to do this. They're choosing to participate in it. You can see the nature of the charges that are on the slide there that we tend to end up dealing with. It is a lot of family conflict stuff, really, at the end of the day. That is the crux of what's going on. It may manifest itself into criteria that fits one of these charges, but at the end of the day, it's parents and kids that escalated in a conflict that got way beyond what any family would probably want to be experiencing, and certainly not something that we want to put kids in detention around. So we're trying to get there. When we were in person, we were trying to get there within 48 hours. We try and be comprehensive and holistic around this, looking at substance use disorder needs, looking at anger management. Education is often a challenge with the population that we serve. Sometimes the conflicts are around that, around education performance, around school, how they're doing in school, and some of the challenges that can come with that. And we don't have to be the mental health provider. We often are. As you know, most of the community mental health centers are kind of a provider of last resort, and a lot of these families don't have a lot of resources. They don't have a lot of means or access to care. But if they already have a mental health provider, and some of them do, then we'll try and coordinate with that provider. We'll connect them with that provider. We don't want to be disruptive in their care. If they have a therapeutic relationship with a person or a system, they can continue down that path and still benefit and participate in the program. It doesn't have to be us in that situation. We certainly want to be person-centered, individual and family therapy, counseling, medication management. There's a pretty robust set of services that are around there. Continuation of crisis if needed. So true to the MCOT spirit, like they're there to try and help get people connected and positioned. And then when they are connected to services, they want to disconnect and withdraw and go about trying to help the next person in services. They will keep them in services up to that 90-day window if they need to try and help make sure that they've successfully made that transition. A lot of these youth have been eligible for yes waiver services. You think about the intensity of the packages that come with yes waiver, it's pretty impactful and pretty powerful. And so knowing that these kids are popping it, some of these kids are the same ones that will show up in our psychiatric emergency center over at Ben Taub, from a parent bringing them or from a school referral. So many of them are at risk of institutionalization on many fronts, not just the juvenile probation or detention center, but several places. And then case management and the youth peer supports. And again, I'm going to let her come and talk about what she does and how she does it. If you're not impressed by Arianna, it's because you fell asleep. I promise you, she is awesome. She does tremendous, tremendous work for us. Out there is a little video of her that is also equally powerful. There's something that is always impressive to me about when people share from their own lived experience, and she does that with such eloquence and effect that it's super impressive. The outcomes, I mentioned that we're working on a little change. It's not done, but it's done. So our ARPA committee did approve ARPA funds. It's going to Commissioner's Court in a couple of weeks, where if you're familiar with Harris County, some of you might know we have a jail diversion center for adults. We're going to open a jail diversion center for youth. And so there will be a spot that law enforcement can take them to, rather than to the detention center. Because today, if they have to leave and there's not a family member willing to step into this conflict, they're left with little options, right? Other than leave them in an escalating situation or take them to detention. The three of us have been working on that for, I don't know, it seems like longer than it probably is. I think we're on it only took us 5 proposals to actually get it through. But we did, and so that's supposed to go to court soon. So I'm excited about what that'll look like. When you hear the outcomes, you'll hear that not having a place for them to go ultimately impacts their ability to complete the program. And we don't want that. We don't want kids to end up in detention or have additional criminal justice involvement simply because we didn't have the right alternatives for them. But why don't you come on up and share your experience? I tell you what, let me get by and then you come so that we don't knock each other off the stage. You go right ahead. I'm not moving.
Hello, everyone. So, oh, sorry. I'm going to go to the next slide, if I can. So what is youth peer support? We've heard a lot about what peer support is throughout the conference and how a lot of people want to implement this into a lot of different systems. Youth peer support is different in a little bit of a capacity because it's working with youth who are vulnerable. Peer support in general has to where you have to have lived experience. So part of lived experience in either a mental health diagnosis, a substance use disorder, and or sometimes criminal justice involvement is very impactful to work with these youth because they understand that you get it. You get where they're coming from, you get their road, and you understand where they're coming from. So what is it that a youth peer support does? They are somebody who helps advocate for the youth. The youth sometimes feel, as I've heard through many other stories in the conference, like they're not heard, like their voice is in the background. And so therefore, you really work with the youth, getting their voices brought to the table, maybe staffing with other agencies or other people like the psychiatrist, the clinician on the team, and saying like, hey, this youth really wants to know these things that are happening to them. Why is it that their diagnosis is the way it is? What is the medication that they're taking? And so you're able to help bring their voice forward. You're also able to help teach them that recovery is possible. Sometimes whenever you're coming in through the criminal justice system, it looks very dark. And so they don't know what might be ahead of them. So telling them these are the things that to expect. These are the things that are about to come in front of you. And that's part of advocacy. So advocacy is where you get to really help bring their voice forward, let everybody know in their world that, hey, this youth really needs extra supporting. They might sound pretty mean sometimes, the youth might, but I promise you that they're just scared, they're alone. So really helping advocate for their voices to be heard by their family, by their loved ones, and things and people that support them. Is there a clicker? Perfect. That's what I was looking for. That's better. So the next part of it is going to be graduation, and it's going to be with oh, it is me. Oh, okay, I apologize. So part of the graduation part is that they go through the 6-month period of the program, and whenever they go through the 6-month period, they get offered a graduation. And part of the graduation looks like they meet their treatment goals. Whenever they come in, they get a clinician assigned to them. That clinician will say, okay, these are the things that we need to work on. Sometimes it's medication management. Sometimes it's resources in their community. Sometimes it's needing to learn how to navigate their community. So sometimes it might be riding the bus, teaching them how to navigate that community, teaching them like, hey, these are the, like, teaching them how to get their first job, maybe interviewing questions with them. And so that's really impactful over overall wellness as well. So that might be a treatment goal. Another treatment goal might be making sure that they make their first appointment and really educating them why they need to make that first appointment. Another one might be what to expect. So as they complete graduation, they're able to be eligible for expungement process. They're able to get a certificate of completion. That's really important for a lot of youth because sometimes they might have not ever completed anything else in their life. So to show them a certificate of completion and say like, hey, we appreciate all the work that you put in because it is at the end of the road, your work. And they also begin the process as to seal the arrest. So I really work with them on educating them on what that looks like. Expungement is a really important process of recovery as well. And so it's amazing to see that offered. I like to usually put faces to a story because a lot of the times we might tell these services that we give and we might not understand the people that we're serving. So one of the stories that I will tell you today is of a young woman who is 16. When she came in, her family had just experienced a fire. All their belongings were gone, family of 6, and they had nothing but a few clothes and all confined to one hotel room. So that in itself, 6 people in one hotel room is a lot. On top of the psychosis that she's experiencing, on top of the self-harm she was experiencing, things got pretty bad. She got arrested, and after being arrested, she was offered the FIRST program. When she was offered the program, she was able to work with psychiatrists, with a clinician, and with me, really helping educating her. These are the things that are going on. She had never been offered mental health services before. Her family didn't know how to access services. They didn't know what services look like. And so with establishing that, she was offered a program called Project Change. That project was able to help her for a 9-month period to where she was able to stabilize. She was then able to stabilize on her medication, learn some healthy coping skills, and learn how to deal with her psychosis that was going on. She was able to graduate the FIRST program, and then she was able to stabilize and keep the medication that she had. Another story of a young woman, she had an arrest. Her and her mother, like we heard earlier, had an altercation over a phone. And whenever she had this altercation over the phone, her and her mother went back and forth, and she put a black eye on her mother. What you don't really see in the beginning of the story is that she had just had a suicide attempt, and she tried to attempt off of medication. So she had been off of her psychiatric medication, I want to say probably for about 3 months, by my understanding. So during that gap, she was arrested, she was put in the FIRST program, and she then was offered services. She was self-harming because she had just been sexually assaulted. So all of that combination ended up her to having criminal justice involvement through the FIRST program, but also being able to not have it on her record was an amazing thing. She was offered back to be put back on her psychiatric medication, and then also to help giving her those coping skills to become the person who she is today. She was able to get on the cheerleading team like she wanted to, get new friends, stop maybe using these old coping mechanisms that she was using, smoking marijuana, and find something different to be able to use to help positive in her life. Today, she graduated. She's still doing medication management, and she was doing Yes Waiver, and I believe she's on the track for graduation for Yes Waiver as well. So thank you for letting me share these stories with you. These people I've been able to work with personally, and they hold very near to my heart because recovery is possible, and it is possible to see that this program works.
Okay, now I feel pressured to get up. True peer pressure here. But I think I almost knocked that light down. Okay, this. All right, so in 2018, when we looked at eligible offenses for the FIRST program, we were looking at those criminal mischiefs within the home and the assaults. There were 949. Our first year, like John mentioned, you're not forced to go into this, you have to agree to go into it. So there were a total of 369 referrals in 2019. Skip to 2022. At this point, there have been 302 referrals made, and on a, I guess you can say on a daily basis, the average of active first cases, I checked this morning, is 107 cases. Thank you. It is impressive. The average length of stay for the 285 juveniles admitted into detention center was about 35.3 days, and that is at, and I'm embarrassed to say this, about $754 a day for a stay in detention for juveniles. So when you look at the cost effectiveness of diverting kids out of detention, it's a lot. And then you look at the added expenses for the family of an attorney missing work, it adds up. According to the Justice Systems Partners, the evaluation of the first program, the overall completion rate was 71%. So I would say that this is a, thank you. And again, with this lived experience, you see why this becomes a success.
I want to circle back to something Wayne said. When we had our first meeting, no pun intended, but our first meeting, and Sarah, you were there, and we're in the room, and then Wayne comes in, and then we kind of explained to him the program, and he literally did say, yes, we're on board. I was like, Wayne, we haven't even talked about anything yet. He goes, you told me the problem. We're there to fix the problem, right? And then he leaves the room and leaves it to you and says, figure it out. No, that was a little bit extreme, but that's exactly what happened. Is literally, yes, there's a problem. We're all going to work together. And I want y'all to know, all right, so the eligible offenses are criminal mischief, assault family member, Class A, terroristic threats, and deadly conducts. And so we don't do aggravated assaults, but a lot of times as y'all know, and my officers in the room know, a lot of aggravated assaults are really more deadly conducts, like, the weapons on the side. And so we'll reduce it to a deadly conduct to put them in the program. And this is not a loosey football thing. This is not, okay, we're going to follow it. I can count on one hand the amount of times we've filed on someone for not participating. Because what we do is we do a deep dive as why aren't they participating? 90% of the time it's because the parents aren't bringing them there. And so the 3 or 4 times we've done this, it's only because the parent wants them to do it and the kid's refusing to do it, so we have to follow on them. Okay, so it's so successful. 70% complete, and what I mean by that is they complete the program. Now, some of them obviously pick up new cases that are usually not family violence, and that's about 50% of the time. But we've drastically reduced it. As you can see, I think if I go back, our young women, are the most successful. 78% are the most successful. Hispanic women are 93% successful. And I was talking to Wayne during breakfast, and I didn't understand why this was, and I guess it's because women are more open to therapy than the boys. The worst are the white males. They actually have the least success rate. But what's so encouraging is you have a vision. You hope this is going to work, and then it looks like the data is showing us that it does. A lot of times, if they complete the program and they've picked up a higher case that has nothing to do with family violence, we'll just close them out. They'll continue getting their mental health services, and then they just have to deal with their new case in court. But we have seen a drastic change in how families are doing it. And then, that when we were doing pre-COVID, the graduation ceremonies, like we would bring pizza and like cake. And that was kind of a lot for a DA to be a part of. But, you bring mental health folks involved, and you're all compassionate, and the juvenile probation folks, and there were a lot of hugging and stuff. And then COVID happened, and we didn't have to do that anymore. But we're still giving them the certificate, right? But, in one of those first graduation programs, remember, Henry, that was very powerful. And Sarah, you were there. This woman stands up, and she was in tears. And she goes, "Thank you. I've now have my son back." And people were telling me I was at my wit's end and I had to call law enforcement to get help. And you know what? She was right. She did. But luckily, we created another path for her and her family that she could get her son back. And there's so many stories. And again, it's just we're giving them the cases and they're the ones working the magic. But if you go back to your jurisdictions, talk to your DAs, this is a great way because court is not the place for these kids. And hopefully we are changing the world one kid at a time. Thank you.
I want to add to that as we're about to have a question, the success piece of that is overall across all the race, ethnicity, and genders, there's a 50% reduction in new referrals in the year following completion of FIRST. And so that's pretty powerful. The completion rate of 71% is powerful. And then to that point, 93% reduction in new referrals for Hispanic females in the group it's a pretty dynamic thing. It's one of the first studies I've seen where frankly Caucasians don't fare as well as people of color in the study, in the evaluation. And so that idea of that very real reduction in new referrals for new cases is a pretty stunning development if you really begin to look at it. We'll share once the DA is still finishing up her review of it, and once it's there, we'll publish it and put it out there publicly for everybody. But I just wanted to reiterate that and appreciate my colleagues for being willing to make this kind of program available and successful.
I believe there are some questions. We can take a few. We have a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Fantastic initiative, really, honestly. I know one of my first cases in juvenile was a rubber band fight, and it still amazes me that there was actually a charge for that. But with this, are you guys working with, I think that we had a presentation about T-Chat. Do you guys work with, have you been in touch and working collaboratively with T-Chat? Their counseling, as far as counseling, getting, how do you involve counseling in your program?
So most of the counseling that's happening with these youth are happening through our program. T-Chat, a lot of T-Chat's access is through the schools. And so since the programs are coming, the kids are coming to us, certainly they would be eligible to, but most of them are being absorbed into our system or have providers already.
Okay. And then just rounding up again with the 504, another presentation that we have had here. Have you received a lot of children referrals, or has this involved kids under that that type of program, that have had issues, any kind of disabilities, mental health?
Yeah, so I am certain. So there's not a limitation on those eligible for the program. If kids have learning disabilities or other disabilities, they are eligible to participate in the program. I'm confident that we have. I couldn't specify the percentage exactly in terms of how many of them, but as I mentioned, these youth tend to revolve and rotate through lots of systems, special education as well, and so I'm confident that some of the youth have been a part of the special education system.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, from what your folks tell me, at least 50% of the parents are in need of mental health counseling that was not recognized beforehand.
There's a very significant need on the parent side of this process.
Thank you very much, because that's where I was going next with my question. Sorry, I'm hugging all the, oh, there's a lineup. Do you require the parents to go through programs, through some counseling?
It's a family diversion program, so they have to be part of
And
it.
there's a, I didn't mention, I probably should have, there's a formal actual kind of agreement. I think we would all question the bindingness of that, but there's an agreement and the parents and the youth have to sign it, saying they'll participate in the program and engage in the care process.
And last comment and observation, love the person-centered focus. Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Gonzales. How does the probation department or the detention center screen for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder?
Good question. It's one of those I'd have to say, let me get back with you on that. I will say that we do a full medical screening with every kid that comes in. And then for the kids that are coming into detention, and the majority of those are going to be detained, we do have a full battery of psych and psychological, psychiatric evaluations, because these are the kids that are more than likely going to be placed. So we do a full battery of evaluations on them. You're welcome.
I tried to lower this, but it didn't work, so I hope you can hear me. Very, very impressive. So just a couple of questions, comments. Part of the challenge is the families that these kids come from. So, and we hear a lot about MST, multisystemic therapy. There's some really alternative family placements. But, so what are your, I mean, how are you going to deal with those ecological factors? Like where the kids are coming from, those family factors, those neighborhood factors. And again, the YES waiver does provide that intensive wraparound services. Do you have the capacity for MST? Do you have the capacity for respite programs for the families? Because again, we know if we do all this stuff, but return the kids back to the environment that they came from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'll jump into that. So
Yeah.
we do have MST teams. So we,
Right.
prior to Uvalde, there were 4 MST teams in Texas, and we operate 3 of them in Harris County. And so, and frankly, my friends in probation fund most of that. So to their credit, they've made an investment in that. They operated the only team for a long time, and then actually partnered with us and wanted to transition the actual care management of that to our team. So they are eligible, and that I didn't go through all the programs that these kids could land in, but that is, it's a heavily involved one.
Right.
The evidence around it is so strong that it is a no-brainer. And that respite piece is why we're trying to create the youth diversion center so that there can be a
Yeah.
spot. And we'll operate it according to the crisis respite standards. That's kind of where we're gonna, it's not licensed, but that's where the structure and standards will come from that we operate that center from.
So
And with that diversion center, I do want to say that we do plan on tying an MST and FFT team to that as well.
That's great.
And I apologize, I don't want to cut anyone, but I know that our panelists will be available outside. We have to move on because we do have a working lunch. So if you want to ask any more questions, they will be available outside. We have a table set up. Again, this is an amazing diversion program. I think we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. I think we can apply it to our jurisdictions. We can maybe tweak it a little bit in regards to our different areas, but it is remarkable, and thank you all for sharing this.